from MTN, the Montana Television Network. This is Face the State.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us on Face the State. Today we begin our debate series. We've asked the statewide candidates for Secretary of State, Attorney General, State Auditor, and the Supreme Court to join us for a lively discussion of the issues here in Montana on Face the State. Our format is simple. We will ask each candidate a question who will be allowed a 30-second response. The other candidate will rebut for 30 seconds, and then a 30-second reply will be allowed. I will then repeat the sequence, starting with the other candidate. I, as the moderator, reserve the right to follow up if necessary. So today, we are joined by the two major party candidates running for Attorney General, Republican Tim Fox and Democrat Larry Jent. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
Using the very scientific process before the debate, we decided by a coin toss that the first question would go to Attorney General Tim Fox. So you've been Attorney General for 4 years now. Actually, not quite 4 years, like three and change. So why do you deserve another term?
Well, I think first of all, Dave, I sought this position out. I knew it was important. I didn't have to be persuaded or talked into running, and I didn't wait until the last minute to file. I know the importance of this position to the people of Montana. We've done a lot in the last 4 years. We have protect consumers. We have done public safety initiatives. We've fought federal overreach. We've managed the office. I think all of those accomplishments that we can get into later will serve to convince the voters to give me another 4 years.
Mr. Jent?
I'm running because the people need a champion. The people need a choice. And elections are about choices and debates are about differences. And during this debate and during this campaign, you've been able to see the differences in the philosophy and the outlook of how we view the office. I believe the purpose of the Attorney General is not only to keep our community safe, but also to seek justice. And during the course of this debate today, I'll tell you in some of the specific areas how I'd like to do that.
Mr. Fox.
Well, I have done those things along with the 800 or so dedicated public servants at the Montana Department of Justice. We've had the first of ever prescription drug abuse prevention program. We've updated our human trafficking laws. We have brought the first canine units to the Montana Highway Patrol for drug interdiction. We have expanded the 24/7 sobriety program from 17 counties to 49 counties. We have improved sexual assault prosecution, and that's been a major initiative in my time as Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Mr. Jent, so you've run for statewide office twice before. You've run for governor in 2012. You dropped out of the race before the primary, ran for Congress in 1996. Why should Montanans take this particular run for the Attorney General seriously?
And the reason they should is because I have the experience and the philosophy to do this job and the dedication to do this job. And let me add the other runs. A lot of people do exploratory runs. The governor run was an exploratory run, and when Steve Bullock got in, a much better funded and well-known candidate, it didn't make any sense for me to go further, particularly because I was already in the Senate and had a session left to go. The congressional race, I learned a lot, and I won every single election after that. And so I'd suggest to you that candidates, when they first start, often gain name recognition and experience by running.
Your time has expired.
Thank you.
Mr. Fox.
You know, I've practiced law in Montana for over 30 years, or excuse me, just less than 30 years. I've born and raised here, went to college here, went to law school here, and the only job that I've ever sought out in an elected position is that of Attorney General. I ran in 2008, narrowly lost, ran again in 2012. I know the office very well. I was prepared to run, motivated to run, and I think I've accounted for myself quite well in the last 4 years.
Mr. Jent.
I think the people not only need a choice, but they need a change. And the reason is because of the misuse, non-use, and politicization of this office. For example, there's been absolutely nothing done on public land access, no new cases filed by this Attorney General, very little being done on consumer protection. And a lot of ideological lawsuits joined all across the country that have nothing to do with keeping our communities safe here at home. I think people are looking for a focus on safe communities, a focus on conservation issues, and that's not currently present.
All right, well, we'll turn to the question to Mr. Fox then. Let's just actually take up this charge about consumer protection. Mr. Jent alleges here today that you have done nothing on consumer protection or very little. How would you respond to that charge?
Well, that's completely not true, and I don't know where he gets his information, but actually in the last 4 years we've been more successful in consumer protection than ever before. We have stopped about $5 million from being scammed from Montana citizens. We've recovered over $8 million from scams and given that money back to Montana citizens. And by the end of the year, we will have settled or received upwards of $30 million for the state of Montana from big corporate scammers, mortgage service companies, pharmaceutical companies, and Volkswagen.
Mr. Jent.
That's a drop in the bucket compared to what other attorneys are doing. If you look even in a perfunctory search of the state AG blog, of what other consumer protection units are doing, that's very minimal. In Montana, consumer protection for insurance and securities is done by the auditor. Everything else goes to the Attorney General's office. We have problems with mortgage lending, scamming from the big mortgage lenders. We have problems with pharmaceuticals. A good example would be the EpiPen. The Attorney General of Minnesota just filed a case about the EpiPen alleging antitrust violations. There's very little, if any, antitrust enforcement going on right now in this office.
Mr. Fox?
Well, again, it's simply not true. We have a robust antitrust program. We're involved in many multi-state actions enforcing antitrust laws in Montana. We are involved in the EpiPen investigation as we speak. And certainly the numbers show that Mr. Jent is actually wrong. We've recovered more and saved more for Montanans in the area of consumer protection than ever before by an Attorney General.
Mr. Jent, you just brought up that your philosophy is different from Mr. Fox's. Could you expand upon that a little bit and tell the viewers how your philosophy is different and how they'll affect your role should you become AG?
I'd love to. The Attorney General should be the champion of the people, should be championing the people against the special interest. In this Attorney General's office, there seems to be a predilection for jumping into lawsuits sponsored by the Republican Attorneys General Association and groups of Republican Attorneys General all over the country for topics that have nothing to do with that. A good example would be the immigration lawsuit over the Dreamers. The Montana Attorney General's office joined that lawsuit. Why do we need to be there? Especially when we have 1,400 untested rape kits in Montana. Why do we need to be involved in a lawsuit over a coal port in Washington?
Thank you, Mr. Jent. Mr. Fox, how would you respond to that?
The Attorney General's responsibility includes not only public safety but consumer protection, but also making sure that Montana's interests in this state and outside of the state are protected and the rule of law is defended. I have joined lawsuits that implicate Montana's interests. The waters of the U.S., which we've stopped, those regulations that the EPA promulgated, the Clean Power Plan, again, outside of the authority of the EPA, we've stopped those. Illegal immigration executive order, we've stopped that. The federal courts have agreed with us on every step of the way that the Obama administration is overstepping its authority.
Mr. Jent.
I don't think we need to be so worried about whether the Obama administration's overstepping its authority as we need to be worried about violent crime in Montana, as we need to be worried about the condition of the state lab. The two most experienced pathologists in Montana, the fellow that ran the lab, Gary Dale, and Willie Kemp, both quit soon after the Attorney General took over. We've had many dozens of drug cases dismissed because drugs disappeared from the state lab. We just had the Supreme Court dismiss a case where some fellow languished in Roosevelt County because the lab didn't test drugs. Let's focus on Montana crime, not distant issues. Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
So actually, go ahead. Please respond, and we'll go another round.
It's no secret that I inherited a crime lab that had many problems when I became Attorney General. The medical examiner issues, where we had a contract medical examiner and a state employee medical examiner feuding, was a problem that had been going on for 14 years through 3 other administrations, all Democratic. Mr. Jent was in the legislature for 14 years. He's a criminal defense lawyer. He knew about these problems, and in his tenure in the legislature, he did nothing about it. I've fixed those problems.
That's simply not true. The problems with the doctor there, the doctor that the pathologist, which they had problems with, were brought to the Attorney General's attention, and he did nothing. He ignored it until it finally started blowing up court cases. Then and only then did somebody do something about that.
That's not true. Again, there was a 9-month wait for chemistry analysis. Mr. Jent's clients, many of them who are drug dealers, he knew about that. We've got it down to 2.5 months, which is well within the industry standards. We did it without his help.
Mr. Jent, you've been critical of these lawsuits that Mr. Fox has filed, and one of those lawsuits sought to stop recent carbon emission standards established by the EPA. So let me ask you this. Should the EPA be allowed to establish carbon emission standards or not?
Yes. And I believe in the Clean Power Plan. I believe we have to do something about global warming. Now, the trouble with the Clean Power Plan is the Obama administration essentially moved the finish line in the race, moved the bar higher, and that was one of the problems. But if you look carefully at the Clean Power Plan, it's a good effort to do something about carbon emissions. And I believe in it, and I support it.
Mr. Fox.
Well, Mr. Jent is actually out of touch with even his own party, and that's why all of the major labor unions in Montana have endorsed me. The FL-CIO, MEAMFT, the Montana Public Employees Union, they've all endorsed me. Today we announced 100 law enforcement officers have endorsed me, and the law enforcement is behind me too, because these are job-killing initiatives. They're outside the authority of the Obama administration to do it. He's out of touch with his own party, and he's certainly out of touch with Montanans.
Mr. Jent.
The only reason the labor unions endorsed Tim Fox when I had a 96% voting record is that I wasn't in the race. Tim Fox never did one single thing for labor unions before he became Attorney General, and was unknown to labor unions, and had no experience in labor law, had no experience in the legislature. The labor unions endorsed him because they were expedient. They were looking for somebody to endorse, and their endorsement process took place weeks before the filing deadline for this office.
Mr. Fox, what have you done for labor unions then?
Well, first of all, let me just say it wasn't because there was no one else in the race. Mr. Jent asked all of the labor unions to rescind their endorsement of me, and they told him no. He asked them to co-endorse with him and me. They said no. As Attorney General, we have employees who are part of the Montana Public Employee Association. I have treated them very well. We have collectively bargained very well. We have done everything we can to treat our employees well, give them market pay increases, give them job security and training. I'm proud of what we've done for the Department of Justice employees.
Mr. Jent.
I've been endorsed by labor unions in every single race that I've been in where I've been a file candidate except the congressional race. Every single legislative race, which I believe would be 8 races. And I've got a 96% voting record in the Senate. I don't know what it is in the House, but it's very close to that. And no, I'm not endorsed by the unions this time. And you know, yes, I did get in within the legal time frame, but late in the primary period. And labor knows that I've been their friend. I literally saved the public pension system as a legislator.
Mr. Fox.
Well, again, obviously labor is not behind him. I also have the major agricultural associations, the stock growers, the Farm Bureau, the Montana Chamber of Commerce, the Realtors, the NRA. No one has endorsed Mr. Jent. He got into this late. He had to be persuaded. He didn't want the job. He certainly doesn't know much about it, and that's reflected in his comments in this race.
I disagree.
Mr. Jent, actually, the next question's to you.
Okay,
let me go back to that conversation about lawsuits, because I mean, I think you would acknowledge it is absolutely important for the Attorney General to occasionally join other lawsuits in other states. So given that you've been critical of Mr. Fox, what I want to know from you is what is your standard for whether or not you would join a lawsuit that's been filed with other Attorney Generals against the federal government? What's the standard that you would apply?
Does it affect individual Montanans, or is it just an ideological statement? That's the standard. The lawsuit about the bathrooms in Nebraska, whatever that was, over the federal guidance, which isn't even a law or a regulation, and no Montana school district asked to join that lawsuit, is a mere ideological statement. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, when we have needs, real needs, and street crime in Montana.
Mr. Fox.
Well, first of all, let me just say, Mr. Jent's from Tennessee. Even the Tennessee Attorney General joined the lawsuit to prevent the federal government from asserting control over our schools. And there are lots of parents who are very concerned about that. But again, it's about the rule of law and whether or not the precedent set by that case is something that would affect Montanans. That's why I get involved in those cases. We've won at every step of the way in Waters of the U.S., Clean Power Plan, the immigration suit, and now the federal government is enjoined from their bathroom rules.
Mr. Jent.
The federal government may be enjoined, but at what cost? At what cost of distraction to this Attorney General's office? This is a case that means absolutely nothing to anybody in Montana. But you know what? The Obama administration, even though they're politically clueless in bringing this in shortly before the election, has made a good point. And they're on the right side of history for LGBT citizens. The Attorney General's office is not. That's why they vigorously opposed the same-sex marriage ruling. That's why...
Mr. Jent, your time has expired. Mr. Fox, in Montana, I think you acknowledge we have a meth problem. According to the Billings Gazette, felony drug possessions are up in Yellowstone County, representing a third of criminal cases filed last year, and most involve meth. What is the appropriate response to the meth crisis, and what can the Attorney General's office do about it?
You know, it's not just methamphetamine. It's heroin, cocaine, opioid prescription drugs, recreational use of marijuana, and even alcohol. We need an all-of-the-above plan. We need prevention, education. We need to prosecute the drug criminals. We certainly need to make sure that we have treatment options available so that we can intervene as quickly as possible in people's lives. One of the problems we have right now is we don't have enough treatment options. They're not quick enough. People relapse. We need to have more treatment, more drug courts.
Mr. Jent, what's your plan?
I believe that Scott Twito, the county attorney in Billings, and the judges in Yellowstone County have shown a lot of leadership on early intervention, and early intervention is the key. You got to get people out of the cycle somehow, whether it's drugs or alcohol. That's why the 24/7 program for alcohol is very effective. In the drug program, though, what you can't do is let people languish in jail or let them out on probation and give them a chance to fail. You need to get them into a treatment program and a modality right away where they can change their lives. People want to be sober.
Mr. Fox.
2 years ago, I established the Montana Healthcare Foundation to take the proceeds of the sale of Blue Cross Blue Shield. They are now spending money up to $150 million available to them. We've asked them to study this issue of treatment. I'm doing proactive things, not just talking about it, we're doing it. Certainly drug courts are important, and we're working with Scott Twito very directly and other county attorneys on that issue as well. But again, we have to have an all-above policy where we keep people out of getting into the cycle of drugs. We get them out of it as quickly as possible with the intervention. That's work that I'm doing.
Since we're talking about drugs in Montana, Mr. Jent, let's talk about Initiative 176, which didn't make the ballot, but it would have made possession of marijuana in Montana illegal. So as the top law enforcement officer in the state, do you think marijuana possession should be illegal completely? Should it be made available to those with medical need? Or should possession be completely legal, and why?
I think that medical marijuana should be available for the people that really need it. I don't believe in complete legalization of marijuana, and I'll tell you why. When I have these cases in federal court where I act as a public defender, what I see is a disturbing problem, a disturbing trend of use of alcohol and marijuana, sometimes as early as the 8th and 9th grade, and it goes on to harder drugs, to more serious crime, and when they land in federal court, of course, they're really in trouble. And I just don't think that legalization of marijuana is the way to go. I think marijuana is a drug. I think there's a medical use for marijuana in certain limited circumstances.
Mr. Fox.
Well, let's be clear. In 2011, Larry voted against or voted for gutting the medical marijuana initiative that the people of Montana had passed. He didn't just vote for that. He vigorously supported that. 2012, he vigorously supported an initiative on the ballot, number 124, again to gut medical marijuana. He's flip-flopped on this. We don't know where he'll sit when if he ever got to be Attorney General. That's a kind of a dangerous thing where people can't make up their mind. So certainly I've been defending the medical marijuana laws. I'm required to do that as Attorney General. It's not a policy or philosophical thing for me.
Mr. Jent.
Well, first off, the bill I voted for was too harsh, and I've said that. But you know, by cutting back medical marijuana from the chaotic situation, we have it now to where there's a concept on the ballot, I-182, that's about right. I believe that's a good compromise position for people that believe there are certain folks who really need the relief that medical marijuana gives. Interestingly enough, my opponent refuses to take a position on that initiative. I'm for it.
Well, what's actually where you basically brought up my next question. So Mr. Fox, let's talk about 182, lifting those new restrictions on medical marijuana, which Larry Jent voted for in 2011. But if 182 passes, do you think the legislature or somebody should act to move the effective date of removal, which right now is July of 2017 because it was a drafting error? Do you think that should be fixed?
Well, first of all, I don't take positions on those initiatives on the ballot because if they pass, I may have to defend them, right? Because they become state law. The people of Montana need to have confidence that their Attorney General is not letting their personal or political philosophies get involved. That's what Mr. Jent wants to do, is to use the Attorney General's position as a super legislature to decide what he'll defend and what he won't defend. That's not the Attorney General's job. And so I won't be taking a position on those initiatives because I may have to defend them if they pass.
Well, Mr. Fox has certainly taken a position on Marcy's law, but he won't take a position on this initiative. What should be done about the effective date? It's an anomaly because the effective date is in June of 2017, and yet it, for example, provides a transition period, but the section on the transition period is not effective till the end of the transition. So even a cursory reading of the initiative will let you know that there's a mistake there, and I believe it's just simply the template in legislative services always has June 30th at the end. It's a clear mistake and it needs to be fixed either by a court or the legislature.
Mr. Fox?
Mr. Jent, again, doesn't have correct information. I don't know who's advising him. I have not supported Marcy's law. That will be on the ballot. I have not taken a position on that. They certainly have showed up at the events that I do, but that's not supporting publicly the initiative. Again, Mr. Jent's flip-flopped on a lot of things. He wants to politicize the office. I don't think that's right.
Let's talk about, let's continue this conversation largely about crime and the position of the Attorney General, and let's talk about the Legislative Sentencing Commission. So, Mr. Jent, the Legislative Sentencing Commission is studying a number of proposals aimed to reduce the prison population here in Montana, specifically moving nonviolent offenders either out of prison or greatly reducing their sentences. Where do you stand on this? Are you supportive, and would you support that effort and lobby for it?
In my many years in the Law and Justice Interim Committee, I learned there's a lot of good proposals coming out of those interims. For nonviolent drug offenders, for the first offenders, the key is early intervention and probation and immediate consequences. What we found out in 24/7 when we studied the bills, the various bills, and what happened to offenders, people want to be sober, but there's got to be an immediate consequence when they screw up. Otherwise, there's no treatment, there's no cure. And so I believe probation for the first-time offenders is much more credible than putting them in jail.
Thank you, Mr. Jent. Mr. Fox?
We need to take a comprehensive approach to our criminal justice system. As I've mentioned, I've taken the 24/7 sobriety program, which languished and only had 17 counties, and moved it to 49 counties. We are now exporting that to at least 14 other states because it works. It reduces recidivism. Alternatives to jail can work, but we have to have treatment alternatives available, counseling, we need to get early intervention. Those are the things that I'm doing and I will do going forward in the next 4 years.
Mr. Jent?
We also need to look at the whole structure of what we have on probation versus jail. It costs astronomically less to have someone on probation than it does in the Montana State Prison. Well, one of the problems we have has been with the parole board having people go back and recycle through many serial proceedings because someone on the parole board wanted them to take a course or do something that wasn't mandated either by the judge or by the prison staff. On the committee, I've been a leader in making sure that we had more supervision over the parole board. And that's a real problem, Dave, is having people that shouldn't be there in prison.
So, Mr. Fox, is it your turn to rebut? I'm trying to remember.
This is a new question.
That's a new question, I thought.
Yeah.
Sorry. Sometimes I get lost in the middle of all of this. So, according to a study from the Council of State Government's Justice Center, nearly 20% of all arrests made here in Montana consist of Native Americans. Is racial profiling to blame? And if not, why do we have such a huge disproportionate amount of Native Americans being sent into the prison system?
Well, there's a number of things at issue here. First, let me tell you that the Montana Highway Patrol is in the Department of Justice. And so we've studied the issue of racial profiling, and those studies have shown that the Highway Patrol does not racially profile. But there is, as you say, a disparate number of Native Americans in our jails and who are arrested. The federal government is responsible for law enforcement by large part on our reservations, but that doesn't mean we abdicate responsibility. That's why I've reached out to all of the tribal governments. That's why I have great working relationships with them. We've entered into cooperative agreements, and frankly, those relationships have just got me adopted into the Crow tribe.
Mr. Jent.
The question is why are the Native American defendants a disproportionate amount of both defendants generally and those sentenced to prison? Some of those issues are beyond the state justice system, I think, and they relate to the underlying conditions of poverty and other things on the reservations. But I don't think racial profiling is an issue. We looked at this carefully in the legislature. There might be one or two isolated incidents. I don't think that's the problem. I think it's the underlying causes of crime that are the problem.
All right, well, actually, Mr. Jent, Mr. Fox, it looks like we're now out of time. I want to make sure you get time for your closing statements. But so we're going to actually start the closing statements with Mr. Jent. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim and Dave, for the opportunity to appear on the MTN News this morning. It is a great honor and a privilege to represent my party in this important office. The job of the Attorney General is to be the champion for the people, not the special interest. You won't find me out there looking at filing lawsuits for the coal companies. You won't find me entering into lawsuits out of state over ideological matters. We need to focus on the crime here in Montana. We need to focus on violent crime. I've been a leader in the legislature. I've passed bills and sponsored bills to increase the number of highway patrolmen, to solve cold cases by DNA testing, to stop methamphetamine labs and the components, and to make sure that our public servants are appropriately paid and retained. I've been a leader, I've been successful, I've been effective, and I'll be able to do that. I'd like your vote as Attorney General. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jent. Mr. Fox.
Thanks, Dave, for having us on Face the State. Thank you, Larry, for being here. My family and I want to thank the people of Montana for allowing us to serve you, both as Attorney General and, as you know, families are involved in all of these elected offices, and it's a great thing for us to do as a family. I have worked hard to make sure that we focus on public safety, assisting law enforcement. That's why all of law enforcement practically has endorsed me. Certainly we've focused on consumer protection issues in a better way than ever before, and we will always be fighting federal overreach as long as I'm Attorney General. We had 33 bills in the last two legislative sessions, all passed with overwhelming majorities. Half were carried by Democrats, half by Republicans. The Democratic governor signed them all into law. That's unprecedented for this agency. I work in a bipartisan way. We find solutions for Montana. We move forward for a better state, better families, better work, and I will continue to do that for the next 4 years if you give me your support and your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Thank you, Mr. Jent. It was a lively and lovely discussion, and I appreciate you guys coming on the show. So next time, we will have another one of these debates with the candidates for Secretary of State. Join us here on Face the State. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.